If you're serious about healing from trauma in your past, but what you're doing isn't working, like you feel stuck, overwhelmed, the sadness is getting to you, you feel like you're alone, you've tried a dozen things, you've felt your feelings, you've talked about what happened to you, and you've grieved and released the trauma from your body, whatever that means. What if you've taken that kind of focus on other people and memories and things as far as it goes, and now what you need is your life to be good, like here and now, with clarity and principles that you can rely on so that even when new hard things happen in your life, you'll know the right thing to do. That would be different, wouldn't it? Things could get better, and you would have a reason to trust yourself. That's what's missing for so many people, especially now, especially people who were traumatized as kids. Nobody taught you, or they taught you wrong. There are some ideas and habits that have been extremely normalized in the culture in the past few years. And even though they're popular in some circles, they're messing people up. They wreck relationships. They keep you in confusion. They cut you off from your own power. So if you're ready and serious about stopping the inner chaos, these are 5 things that you've got to eliminate from your life. All right? One is exaggeration and moral inflation. What is that, right? There's a difference between speaking the truth and stretching it to get validation or to get heard. When you start calling rejection trauma, or ordinary conflict you call abuse, or a heated conversation is violence, I keep hearing people say that, you may get sympathy, but you lose something much more important, your integrity. And sometimes it can feel like you have to make things sound worse than they were, like they were bad, but escalating it to these words much worse than they were just to get people to care. Especially if your real experiences were minimized or ignored in your life. You may feel a pressure to amplify the pain just to be believed. But when your words stop matching reality, you lose touch with the actual cause of your pain and with the part that you have the power to change. So there's a growing tendency to treat discomfort as danger, or to label every unpleasantness in extreme terms, to call out any rudeness as assault, or to claim that disagreement is harm. But this doesn't make you right. In fact, it makes you flammable with inflated words serving as the fuel that you're using to propel you out of feeling helpless. But it doesn't make you powerful. It makes you emotionally dysregulated, especially if you've been hurt before. And what helps now is clarity. So say what happened, no more, no less. Let your words be accurate. Let your story be grounded. That's how you build the strength to change your life. Not with outrage, not with a bunch of conflicts with people that you didn't have to have, but with truth. Truth is where all the real power is. Truth may be harder for you to face and harder for other people to hear, but if you're going to heal the damaged perception and the emotional chaos that go hand in hand with trauma, truth is what you must have to recover. You won't always recognize it at first, but you'll find it has a gentle energy to it. It flows. When problems that seemed unsolvable begin to melt and things get better, this is your sign that truth is getting in there. So don't seek to justify yourself. Seek to find the truth. All right, number 2 thing to eliminate from your life is self-pity disguised as moral outrage. Now, if you were mistreated or neglected or betrayed, it's natural to feel anger. And that anger can be righteous, especially when you finally stop minimizing what happened to you. But there's a point where the pain becomes the story that you start telling yourself over and over, not to process it, but to prove something to other people. You start needing people to see how unfair it was. You start seeking evidence that confirms your role as the one who was wronged. And the problem is, this keeps you tethered to the same emotional position where the harm first happened, powerless, waiting, constantly explaining yourself. So you don't have to deny your history, but you do have to stop using it as a lens for every new situation in your life. Retelling the story isn't going to change the past. Getting stronger will do that. Taking action will do that. Quietly stepping into a new way of thinking where you don't need to be blameless to have value, and you don't need everyone to understand before you move forward. That's when you start to heal. You don't need to be vindicated. You need to be free. All right, number 3, the thing to get rid of in your life, you've got to get rid of this if you're really going to move forward. The compulsion to correct or expose other people. So there's a common pattern, especially for people who have lived through chaos, where you end up constantly pointing out what's wrong with other people. You name the dysfunction, you highlight the contradiction, you call people out, you think you're a truth teller, not necessarily because it helps anything, but because, well, you just feel compelled. It's like a need you have. Now, you might tell yourself that you're helping, that you're standing up for something, but it's worth asking, are you actually making anything better? Or are you just repeating someone else's talking points, getting the cheapest kind of dopamine hit, the feeling of being right, without having to do anything that's hard or that's useful? The more you invest in proving how wrong other people are, the less energy that you have for building anything of your own, building something good. It's a distraction to go into correction and calling people out. And it can become an identity, one that feels morally justified. But in reality, it just keeps you agitated and unfocused and disconnected from yourself. And I know some of you in the comments are going to say, no, injustice has to be called out. Okay, well, consider the milieu. You know, you're in a YouTube comment section. I don't know. Are you actually in a position to do good here? Or are you taking your energy and squandering it on a frustration machine? Something, you know, where people are just like grabbing a ton of opinions and feeling overwhelmed. I don't know. Consider a different tack. At some point, you have to stop reacting and start thinking. You have to ask yourself if your criticism is doing good or just giving you a way to avoid the harder work of living by the values you say you have. You don't need to win the moment. You just need to stay steady. Your steadiness is contagious. People feel that. People feel the authority of someone who is level-headed, who's clear, who isn't sort of leaking anger all over people. Truth doesn't have to shout, you know. It doesn't need to punish anyone. You can live your life with quiet clarity, not reactive, not superior, just aligned. And people will feel it and be influenced by it. It's the kind of strength that speaks for itself. All right, the 4th thing that I'm going to tell you to get out of your life is the belief that your emotions they're just uncontrollable. Everyone has strong emotions. And if you've lived through trauma or instability, especially in childhood, those emotions can feel totally overwhelming. They can hit suddenly and hard, and they can just sort of hijack your whole nervous system. You may have learned to fear your feelings or to give in to them or to excuse yourself by saying, I can't help it, or I have to say this. But here's the truth. You may not control what you feel, but you are responsible for what you do next, how you express yourself. And this is especially important when it comes to emotional dysregulation. Those moments when your nervous system is off kilter and everything feels threatening or urgent or hopeless. Because when you're dysregulated, it's common to believe that someone else is making you feel this way, right? And in relationships, that often turns into a demand. Stop making me feel this way. So sometimes, of course, people do behave in ways that hurt or upset us. So you could fairly say they're making you feel a certain way. Okay. But when you're still getting triggered, and by that I mean thrown into a dysregulated state by little hurts or upsets, it's easy to misjudge what's happening. You may be tumbling through a wave of intense emotion that isn't really about the present moment, and no one else can stop that wave, even if they want to. This is why emotional re-regulation matters, and it helps if you know when it's happening. This is everything, in fact, and why I wrote down the signs of dysregulation along with emergency measures to re-regulate on a free PDF. Do you have that yet in your hands? If you want it, I'll put a link to it in the top row of the description section below this video. You can get your copy. You can study it and memorize it and take it with you everywhere. Learning to re-regulate is something that you do for yourself. But man, other people will thank you for it. You do it not by suppressing your emotions. That's not what it is. And it's also not venting your emotions. You know, a lot of us were conditioned to believe venting would recalibrate them. How did that work, right? But by practicing techniques that allow you to feel something and still stay grounded, that's what works. There's dignity in that. There's clarity in that. You don't have to become a calm, perfect person overnight. You just have to stop giving your power away to every emotional impulse that comes through. The belief that emotions that, they just take over, it's a lie. It's one that will wreck your relationships and block your growth. All right, 5. This is another thing to eliminate from your life, and that is the belief that society is the cause of all your problems. Now, it's true that the world isn't fair. There are systems that marginalize people, for sure. Economic pressure, broken institutions, cultural dysfunction, all of it is real. And yes, it affects our lives. But if you start to believe that the problem is always out there and that your problems are, caused by that, it's society, it's out there, you lose something that you need, your ability to take responsibility and ownership of what you actually can change. This is your magic sweet spot in healing. The stuff that society did, what are you going to do? Literally, are you going to change the world and then work on yourself? Come on, right? That's a kind of a youthful thought. Sometimes people are like, I can't work on myself, because, the job market. Well, what we all have to do is work on ourselves where we are. And people who have done the work tend to lead the way in making things better. What you can change are your self-defeating behaviors. We all have them. If you need some help identifying what yours might be, the behaviors that are still holding you back, I can teach some common self-defeating behaviors. It's a download, it's free, and I'll put that in the description section too, right under the top row, so that you can have that. Now, when you can see where you tend to stumble, it's an incredibly positive thing, because unlike some problems in life, these you can change. The old belief that all your problems were just happening to you was true once when you were a kid. I always get in the comments a few people who feel upset when I say these are things you're doing that are re-traumatizing you, because they want to argue with me and say, no, it's the system doing it to me. It's the patriarchy, it's capitalism, it's people today, or whatever you want. If you've struggled for a long time, there's a certain relief in pointing to something big and external that you can't control and saying, that is why. I mean, it takes the pressure off, like, well, what can you do, right? People, right? It implies, that there's nothing you can do when you blame something that big outside yourself. And for a minute, this comes as a weird kind of relief, just like, well, pressure's off. But you pay a price when you give up agency. You stop asking better questions. You stop thinking for yourself. You start repeating familiar criticisms, sharp, clever, often true, definitely, but useless to your actual life. Some of the stuff, we complain about. You feel informed, but you're stuck. You're outraged, but you're passive. And it feels like purpose, but it isn't. And at some point, you have to turn inward and you have to ask, where am I acting like I have no power, when in fact I do? And where am I repeating a problem because it's familiar? And what would it look like to be responsible for my integrity, no matter what the world is doing? You don't have to pretend things are fair. You don't have to ignore injustice, but if you're going to be happier and more functional, you may have to stop waiting for the world to get better before you're willing to live with honesty and action and courage. You won't fix your life by fixing the culture, but you can begin by fixing what's in here. And that's where your real power is. You're living in a world that really does make it harder for some people. Where are you on that? I don't know. We're all probably somewhere in the middle. That's real. But don't let that truth steal the bigger one, that wherever you are right now, whatever is going on, you have power. The most radical thing that you can do is to take responsibility for your own life, to stand up, even in a broken system, and say, I'm not waiting for permission to start living. Because while everyone else is out there arguing about what's wrong with the world, you can be building something beautiful and important, starting with your own honesty, your own action, and your own courage to get up and do what needs to be done. That's how you rise above the noise. That's how you get free. It's not easy, but it's yours to do. And if you do it, if you keep showing up, you keep taking responsibility for what's in your hands, the world around you does start to change. Not because it became utopia, but because you became strong. That's the work. That's where power is. And that's where real hope lives. If you like this video, I've got one that you're going to love right here, and I'll see you very soon. Today, what's happening is your own behavior. And the worse you were hurt back then, the more likely it is that you have a pattern of hurting yourself now.